Kia ora, welcome to Under the Checkered Flag, MotoGP edition. I'm your host Kate, and we're just going to jump right in. I am going to start by apologising again. I know, 2 episodes starting with an apology in a row, not ideal. My voice is very, very croaky today. I've come down with some sort of bug, but it's the last of our triple header race reviews, so I figured I can stick it out. I can rest on Monday afternoon, have a nice nap, and then just take it easy later on. Because MotoGP was at Assen, and wow, it was an absolute adventure. Let's start with Moto3. It is without a doubt my favourite race to watch on a weekend at the moment. Moto3 again gave us an absolutely stunning race. There were so many overtakes you didn't know where to look. Not only that, we got an absolutely beautiful last few laps with so many overtakes, so many lead changes, and in the end, on the podium, we got Masia, Sasaki and Onshu, and it really did come down to the wire. You were not sure who was going to take that win, and the adrenaline was pumping, and it remained pumping, and it was just so much fun. And if you've never watched a Moto3 race, I highly recommend you do go and watch one. This one was a great one. There are so many great Moto3 races, they're without a doubt, like I said just before, easily the highlight of my weekend at the moment, and I'm looking forward to watching many, many more Moto3 races. On to Moto2, and this weekend was all about one man, Jake Dixon. Jake Dixon definitely stole the headlines coming into the weekend. He topped both practices and qualified in P2. A very strong performance in the Brit, especially considering this is quite a critical time with silly season approaching and the rumours starting to swell. We know Dorna wants to get a Brit up into MotoGP, and Jake Dixon is looking like the best contender for that spot. Where he'd go, I'm not too sure. My guess would be Yamaha, because he's close friends with Fabio Quartararo. Jake Dixon is close friends with Fabio Quartararo, and I think that's a much more likely place for him to go than, say, Gresini or somewhere like that. Not only will he be super happy with how he performed in qualifying and practice, he got his first win. Big props to Jake Dixon, he definitely deserved that. He did do a really aggressive move on Ayagura in, must have been like the last turn, or at least one of the last 2 turns. It was a little bit contentious, depending on who you support, but overall I think he definitely was the strongest performer of the weekend, and it was a very well-deserved win. While I am on the topic of Moto2, I do just want to mention Pedro Acosta's long lap penalty. Personally, I do not believe it was served correctly, however, the stewards do, and so we will come back to that topic later. So the Moto2 podium was in P1, Jake Dixon, P2, Ayagura, and P3, Pedro Acosta. So let's move on to MotoGP. Now it was Ducati domination yet again, with Marco Bezzecchi delivering a beautiful performance in the sprint and taking P1. It was a very strong performance, and we did get to see some quite good battling early on between Marco Bezzecchi and Pecco Bagnaia. Pecco Bagnaia returned the favour on the Sunday in the main race, taking the win there. It was a very strong performance from both VR46 boys, and I think Valentino Rossi will be sitting at home with a very big smile on his face, knowing that his boys performed brilliantly. While we are on the topic of the VR46 boys, we had a VR46 Academy lockout at qualifying. We had Marco Bezzecchi in P1, Pecco Bagnaia in P2, and Luca Marini in P3. Unfortunately for Luca Marini, he wasn't able to keep up with the race pace of the other riders, and in the sprint, he did finish outside of the points in P10. In the main race, he did manage to gain a good amount of points, finishing in P7. So overall, not a bad weekend for the VR46 Academy. Keeping with the Ducati domination theme, Jorge Martin suffered a qualifying crash that he paid dearly for. The Spaniard ended up in P10 at qualifying, meaning he had to really push in the sprint and the Grand Prix race to make up some brilliant recovery performances, and he did perform those. He did manage to get points on both days. He finished P6 in the sprint and he finished in P5 in the main race. Both very strong performances, and I know while they aren't the results he would have wanted, he can't really complain considering how far down on the grid he was, and I think he should be very happy with the recoveries that he did manage to do. On the other side of the Pramet garage, Johann Zarco was caught up in a tangle in the sprint with Miguel Oliveira. It was a hard move, but a clean move, and I cannot fault Zarco for that. He did unfortunately only finish in P13 in the sprint, and so he was out of the points there. In the main race, he had an absolute shocker. Unfortunately, he was taken out by Fabio Quartararo, so Fabio was performing brilliantly, and unfortunately it looks like he lost either the front or the rear, and Johann Zarco had nowhere to go. He was on the outside, and Fabio just absolutely collected him. I do want to say a massive shout out to Johann Zarco here, even though he had just been absolutely taken out by Fabio Quartararo, ruining his race when he had a chance to score decent points, because we all know that Zarco is much better in the long race. He gains those points later, once people start to get tired. That's when Johann really starts to show his amazing form. So even though he had just been taken out by Fabio Quartararo, the first thing Johann Zarco does is go over to Fabio Quartararo to make sure he's okay. And not only that, he helps the Frenchman up onto his feet, really makes sure he is okay, helps him walk away, and I just have to say that was an absolute beautiful show of sportsmanship from Johann Zarco, and big props to him. I just really hope that come the second half of the season you get some solid results, Zarco. Hopefully a win and we get to see that backflip, but solid results nonetheless. Over at Gresini, it was a mixed bag. It seems to be a common theme for Fabio Di Gianantonio because he had yet another weekend that I'm sure the rider would like to forget. I really am feeling for this guy right now. He had 2 DNFs after an average qualifying performance, and it does look like that his time in MotoGP will be over at the end of this season. I hope he does move over to Superbikes and perform strongly there. It's just, sometimes MotoGP isn't for every rider, and as unfortunate as it is the nature of racing. On the other side of that garage, Alex Marquez did have a reasonable weekend. He did score a point in the sprint, and he did have a really strong performance in the main race. He did qualify 9th, and in the sprint kept 9th. In the main race, he did manage to get a few places and finish in P6. I think overall he will be quite happy with that performance, considering the absolute pace at the front of the field, and he did manage to finish in front of Luca Marini, another Ducati rider, which will no doubt be giving him quite a confidence boost. Over to a Japanese manufacturer. We touched on him before, Fabio Quartararo. Now, he had a really good weekend with the exception of that crash that we mentioned. He qualified really strongly in P4, which when you're up against all those Ducatis is an absolute awesome performance, so props to the Yamaha rider there. Not only that, in the race he secured his first sprint podium. Woo! Good job, Fabio. I know lots of fangirls will be very happy, and this will provide a really big boost for Yamaha coming into the summer break. Unfortunately, he did not score points due to that crash in the main race. Franco Morbidelli, unfortunately, didn't have such a good weekend. He qualified down in P15 and stayed in P15 for the sprint. In the main race, he did manage to score P9, picking up some nice points on that side of the garage as well. Keeping with the Japanese manufacturer, we will move on to Honda. Now, we still have Joan Mir and Alex Rins sidelined due to injury, so in their replacement we had Bradle and also, I apologise, I'm going to get this wrong, Ika Lakinoa. I'm going to need to work on that because I get the feeling he'll be subbing in more given the state of the Honda. Oh, sorry, puppy. Good boy. So, Taka Nakagami, I think this guy is seriously underrated. While he has admitted that he doesn't push the bike to the limits, I do not think that you can blame him, given the fact that on Sunday, yet again, he was the only full-time contracted Honda rider to start the race. Like, that Honda, I know. But he qualified down in P14. In the main race, he did manage to finish in P8. Absolutely strong ride from Taka Nakagami. Not only did he finish in P8, he finished having the pace of the front of the grid. I was incredibly impressed with his ride. I think that he should definitely be getting credit for that absolute beauty of a performance, and on that Honda. Really big props to Taka Nakagami, very well done. Now, Ika Lakinoa, he unfortunately looked like he suffered a mechanical issue, and I was really gutted for the guy because he was actually performing really strongly. And I really like seeing him on the grid. There's just something about him on that Honda that I just seem to quite like. It does seem to suit him, and I do hope that maybe he wild cards later in the season. I don't want to say I want to see him as a replacement rider, because that implies that one of the contracted riders gets even more injured, which I definitely don't want to see. But he is really fun to have on the grid. Stefan Bradl was replacing Rins, so he was in the LCR colourings, which also seemed to suit him. He finished in P13 in the main race, and yeah, none of the Hondas did score points on the sprint, which includes Marc Marquez, who did race in the sprint. He did have an incident in Q1 with Enea Bastianini, where he ran into the back of him while trying to get a tow. Rather unfortunate, and did seriously damage Mark even more. Mark came into this race with a few broken bones, a swollen ankle, and this crash just aggravated his injuries, meaning that on the Sunday he was declared unfit. Let's move on to Aprilia. Now, overall, a pretty mixed weekend. So we had Savadori wildcarding this weekend, and overall it was a reasonable performance. We know that Aprilia is quite strong at Assen, and so I was expecting quite good things. Overall, we did sort of get them. Alicia Spargaro and Maverick Vinales qualified in P6 and P7, Miguel Oliveira qualified in P11, Raul Fernandez qualified in P16, and Savadori in P19. In the sprint, it wasn't too bad, so Alicia Spargaro managed to finish in P4, Maverick Vinales P7, so both got quite good points, and they were up there challenging the KTM and the Ducati. Now, the main race. Alicia got a podium. Well done, Captain. It was really wholesome, and I love seeing the Captain back on the podium. Maverick Vinales, on the other hand, had a very high-speed crash. I was absolutely gutted. I put Maverick in my fantasy team because I know he performed so strongly here. Watching him crash out was devastating. I hope this doesn't get to him psychologically because I do believe he's a really great rider. It's just really unfortunate, and it was very disappointing as an Aprilia and Vinales fan. Miguel Oliveira, it was not his weekend. He remains luckless. So in the sprint, he did have an incident with Johann Zarco, as mentioned earlier, and then he was squeezed between the Marquez brothers, putting him really basically back to the bottom of the grid. He did manage to get a few he did not score points. He did manage to gain a few places, giving him P19, right behind Raul Fernandez in the sprint, who got P18. Unfortunately, in the main race, Oliveira, it looks like it was either a mechanical issue or his shoulder was still playing up. He did have to retire from the race after an incident, leaving Savadori and Raul Fernandez on the grid. Both Savadori and Raul Fernandez did manage to gain points in the race. One thing to note though is Savadori finished P11 and Raul Fernandez finished P12. Bit rough when the wild card in your team finishes ahead of you when you're the one with all the time on the bike. I know Raul is still probably recovering, however, it's not ideal for the rider. Overall though, Aprilia, I think they'll be not too upset with the performance this weekend because it does show that they are still capable of getting up there in the grid and they are still capable of qualifying and battling with the other bikes. Definitely they seem to be ahead of Yamaha and Honda, although I will admit that's not exactly hard at the moment, is it? So hopefully after the summer break, Yamaha and Honda will be up there around Aprilia level, and Aprilia will be up there around KTM and Ducati level. Finally, we move on to KTM. Now, we did see Pol Espargaro at Assen. He wasn't riding, he was there basically to show his face, show his support for his team, and it was really cool to see him at the track, see him cheerful, and see that he is recovered for the most part, and he's happy, he's smiling, and after that big accident, honestly, that's the best thing we can ask for. There are 5 weeks until Silverstone, so we do expect to see him back at Silverstone. One thing to note is I saw that Simon Patterson and his wife, whose name escapes me right now, I am so sorry, they did interview him, and he did mention that he had lost 1.5 centimeters due to that impact on his vertebrae, which is absolutely bonkers, and the fact that he's still willing to get on a bike after that accident, wow, the stuff these guys are made of. I constantly say it, I'm a broken record, but these MotoGP riders are just built different. So we did have Folger and Augusto Fernandez on the grid in the gas. Augusto Fernandez only finished in P14 in the sprint, however he did a really strong GP race, finishing in P10, and Folger also finished in the points in the main race in P14. Jack Miller. So Jack Miller had another weekend to forget. He does seem to be struggling a bit at the end of this first part of the season. So in the sprint he did finish in P11. Not the best performance, obviously, however the main race he didn't last a lap before he crashed. I was gutted. Watching him crash out, you're just like, no Jack, what have you done? Not too sure what happened. I haven't had time to go back and watch the replay because I have been sick, so I've pretty much just been sleeping. We did get treated to a funny Jack Miller moment where he kicked a part of the bike. It must have been a wing or something that came off. It was quite funny. He kicked it in a fit of rage, and the memes that came out straight away afterwards were kind of worth it, to be honest. But that was not the big KTM talking point of the weekend. That talking point comes to Brad Binder. Brad Binder had a really strong qualifying, which, as we know, is quite uncommon for him. He qualified up in P5, giving lots of people, myself included, a lot of hope for the weekend. In the sprint race, he performed really well. He battled up there with Bezzecchi, Bagnaia and Quartararo, showing that he really had the pace and the performance to battle with them. Unfortunately, on the very last lap, he exceeded track limits with either 1 or 2 corners to go, which meant he was pushed out of podium contention. So he crossed the finish line in P3, and we all thought he'd podiumed, and so everyone was like, yay, wholesome! We all just like KTM and Brad Binder, it seems, and it was great. And then we see this little message come up across the bottom of the screen where it's like, exceeded track limits. I think it was a 5-second penalty, so that pushed him down to P5. So that did gift Fabio Quartararo the podium, and to be fair, he would not have got that podium if he hadn't been pushing Binder. It was just, guttering for Binder, and you're like, that really sucks, because it was a fraction. The rules are the rules, and he did exceed track limits, so it was a well-deserved penalty. It was just absolutely gutting. But what was even worse is the exact same thing happened on the Sunday. The exact same place, the exact tiny amount of difference. He exceeded track limits yet again, and again, he finished in P3, and everyone was like, woohoo! And then the same message comes up on the video pass screen, and you're like, this has got to be a glitch. This is from yesterday, surely. And then no, you see the replay, and he's done the exact same thing. He's exceeded track limits in the exact same place, and he's been knocked out of the podium, gifting it to Aleix Espargaro, and you're just like, oh my god, no. Binder, what have you done? Binder, no! It was just one of those moments when you're like, really? For fuck's sakes. What the heck are you thinking? Like, he knew he'd done it, I think, and yeah, it's just one of those things that you do have to accept, and I did really feel sorry for him. However, while we are on this topic, again, we're seeing some inconsistency from the stewards. So directly afterwards, Jorge Martin did the exact same thing. He wasn't penalised. Admittedly, having a penalty would not have made a difference to his placement or where he finished, or the points that he got. However, I do think if the FIM stewards are going to penalise one rider, they should penalise 2. It'd be good for statistics keeping, it would be good for, just recognising patterns and being able to see where multiple riders were going outside of track limits, to see if it's a track design flaw that needs to be changed in the future. That's, just something that I think should be considered. Now, it is noted that track limits are automatically applied with sensors and that side of things rather than eyesight, and I note this because in the Moto2 race, Pedro Acosta got a long lap penalty. Now, he did serve this long lap penalty, so what happened was he saved a crash on his knee. He basically crashed, and then, just used his knee to prop the bike up and carry on riding. He did go offline, and this means that technically he didn't lose a second in the last sector, therefore a penalty applies. Now, when he was doing his long lap penalty, he did the same thing basically. He crashed, saved it, however this means he did run onto the green. To me, this means that he did not complete his long lap penalty correctly. These are the rules as I interpret them, and thus, in my opinion, he should have received another long lap penalty. He did not, and this really frustrated me because he went onto the green the same way Brad Binder did. However, it should be noted here as well that long lap penalty zone is not automatically monitored by sensors, so it's monitored by eyesight. So really, what I'm saying is that the FIM stewards just really need to go to Specsavers, because they're ridiculous and incompetent, and that will be my little rant over. So what can we expect over the next 5 weeks? I imagine the silly season rumours will start spicing up, especially after Alberto Puig, Alberto said this week that Honda wouldn't make Marc Marquez stay if it was clear that he didn't want to be there, because they don't want any rider who doesn't want to be there forced to ride for them. And I think it's been quite clear over the last few weeks that Marc Marquez and probably most of the Honda riders, with the exception of Taka Nakagami, who did have a pretty strong weekend, but most of the other Honda riders are not going to be feeling the love right now. They've all got broken bones. Heck, even Taka Nakagami had a very injured thumb coming into Sachsenring, and he only said this weekend that it was starting to feel normal again. So it just shows how injured and fed up these Honda riders probably are. That being said, what Alberto said wouldn't be exclusive to Marc Marquez, so it probably goes to without saying that Joan Mir is without a doubt having the worst season he could imagine, and so I think it is also very likely that we do see Joan Mir jump ship. I could easily see Joan Mir ending up on the Yamaha, because while the bike isn't as good and as stable as, you know, the Ducatis, KTMs or Aprilias, at least it isn't trying to buck its riders off. So I do think that those will be some rumours that we start to hear coming into the silly season. Moving on to my predictions. Fortunately for me, I succeeded a lot more at Assen than I did at the Sachsenring. I got basically nothing at the Sachsenring, but I didn't do too bad here at Assen. So for the sprint, my predictions were Marco Bezzecchi P1, Jorge Martin P2, and Pecco Bagnaia P3. So I did kind of get 2 pretty correct. The results: Marco Bezzecchi P1, so that was 100% correct. P2 was Pecco Bagnaia, so I did guess him, but I did get the incorrect position. And in P3 was Fabio Quartararo. Didn't see that one coming, let's face it. That Yamaha gifted that position, really. It was just incredible and so fortunate to see him up on the podium. So very, very good. Now in the race, my predictions were Marco Bezzecchi P1, Brad Binder P2, and Pecco Bagnaia P3. So the results: Pecco Bagnaia P1, got it half right, wrong position. P2, Marco Bezzecchi, also half right. And P3, Aleix Espargaro. Again, unexpected podium there, but not an unhappy one. I am very, very happy for Fabio Quartararo and Aleix Espargaro coming into the summer break. Hopefully this does just sort of soften the blow to the start of the season that both Aprilia and Yamaha have had. Now, this is going to be a bit of a shorter episode today just because of the way I am feeling. I would really like to go and have a nap now, and that I definitely think I need. I am going to be back next week as normal, so this is going to be a recurring Monday thing. At least I say it's Monday. These go out Monday night, New Zealand time, so it depends where you are in the world as to when they get uploaded. They may be Monday morning. Heck, it could even be Sunday still for some people. So I'm not too sure. I think next week I will be doing one on either the silly season predictions or rule changes I'd like to see happening coming into 2024. But thank you for listening. Like and subscribe if you feel like, and I'll see you again next week.